Hello students, today we will discuss about Ascent of Sap. In our previous lecture we have studied how the water is absorbed by the roots, mainly the root hairs. Now we will study how the water is moved upward to all the parts of the plants via a stem. Thus, the upward movement of water and the various dissolved substances through stem is what we call ascent of sap. As you can see in the picture, how after absorption by the root hair cells, the water moves through several root tissues such as cortex, endodermis, pericycle, and finally enters the xylem tissues following the apoplastic and symplastic pathways. Once the water enters into the xylem, it continues its upward movement until it reaches the mesophyll tissues of the leaves. The bulk flow of water enters the mesophyll cells and finally evaporates and transpires through the stomata. Only a small amount of water is used up in the plant's metabolism and the growth. Now we come towards the various theories explaining the ascent of sap, how the water moves from the roots against the gravitational force towards the top of a plant. First of all, root pressure theory. This can be observed by cutting a small tomato plant near its base. The xylem sap is seen to flow out through the cut and with the pressure. The pressure of exudation can be demonstrated by placing a vertical tube to the cut end of a stem, and we see a column of sap is seen to rise. This rise occurs due to a hydrostatic pressure developed in the root system called the root pressure. Root pressure, that is a pressure developing in the trachary elements of the xylem as a result of the metabolic activities of the root. The root pressure is caused due to the water potential gradient as is maintained by the activity of the living cells. The root pressure, therefore, is referred to as an active process and is shown by the living roots. Now, the root pressure theory is discarded because of the following objections: that ascent of sap in the plants in which roots were removed. In most of the plants, root pressure is about 2 atmosphere, while tall plants require much more pressure to raise water to the tops. Exuded sap of detopped plant is very less as compared to the absorbed water of normal transpiring plants. Absorption of water is less in detopped plant as compared to the plant with the apex. So these are the certain objections which rejected the root pressure theory for the ascent of sap. The root pressure appears in most plants only when ample amount of moisture is present in the soil and when humidities are high. That is when transpiration rate is poor. Guttation. Guttation, small drops of water on the surface of leaves, water droplets seen exuding from the hydatodes. This is explained by the root pressure. So, the root pressure theory is not acceptable for the ascent of sap. Now we come towards the vital theory. J.C. Bose invented an electric probe by which the activity of cell inside the plant body can be detected. He inserted the needle of the electric probe up to certain distance in the stem and found a pulsating movement in the innermost cells of the cortex. He came to the conclusion that cells associated with xylem show pumping action and pump its sap into the xylem cells. Most of the vital theories were discarded because it was discovered at that time even some poisons like picric acid and carbolic acid can also be translocated through xylem, and ascent of sap is not stopped. Thus, the fundamental basis of the vital theory fails. Now, next come the physical theories. All those theories which consider dead cells of xylem to be responsible for ascent of sap are grouped under physical theories. Some of the physical theories are imbibitional theory, capillary theory, atmospheric pressure theory, and the next one is the transpiration pull and cohesion of water theory, imbibition theory. According to this theory, the rise of water takes place due to imbibitional forces through walls of xylem cells. The magnitude of imbibitional force is 100 to 1000 atmosphere, which is sufficient to raise water up to top of tall trees. Later on, the ringing experiments proved that water moves through the lumen of the cell and not through the walls. Therefore, the theory got discarded. Now, the capillary theory. Boehm gave the capillary theory. Water moves upwards through the lumen of the xylem cells. That capillary force must be playing a role. This theory been rejected because the magnitude of the capillary force is too low to account for the rise of water in tall trees. Vessels which are broader than the tracheids can conduct more water. The vessel of a spring wood provide much conduction of water as compared to the vessels of the autumn wood with a smaller lumen. This is against the law of capillarity. Therefore, the theory was discarded. Now, atmospheric pressure theory. Atmospheric pressure theory. The water transpires from the leaves which reduces the pressure in the xylem cells, and this gap is filled by the water just below it due to atmospheric pressure. But certain objections to this theory are pressure of free surface at the lower end of the plant is required for the atmospheric pressure to operate, and that pressure is not found in the roots. The atmospheric pressure can raise the water only up to 34 feet. It will not be possible for it to raise water beyond that. So this theory also didn't get much support. Now the transpiration pull and cohesion tension theory. Cohesion tension theory was proposed by Dixon and Joly in 1894. The basis of the theory, the cohesion and adhesion properties of the water molecules to form unbroken continuous water column in the xylem. And next is the transpiration pull or the tension exerted on this column. Look at the structure of the xylem. Xylem constitutes of seed tube element, companion cell, and the seed tube plate area. The xylem vessels are tubular structures extending from roots to the top of the plant. Cells are being placed one above the other with their end walls perforated having a continuous tube. Xylem tracheids characterized by pores in their walls. One end of the xylem tube is connected with the root hairs via pericycle, endodermis, cortex, and another end is connected to the substomatal cavity in the leaves via mesophyll cells. And this tube is filled with water. How the movement occurs from the root towards the leaves. The cohesive force between the water molecules and the adhesive force between the water molecules or water column sticking to the surface, forming a continuous water column. That is, the water is filled inside the xylem capillary, and due to cohesion, that is force attracting the similar water molecules and adhesion sticking to the surface. These properties of water forms a continuous water column. The water column can't be broken because of the strong cohesive and adhesive forces of water. The water column is subjected to various forces which try to break it. These forces can be weight of the column itself, the resistance put to it during translocation. Since the magnitude of the cohesive force is much high, the column is not broken by other forces. So the water column in the xylem are continuous. They extend from substomatal cavities in leaves to the roots. These unbroken water columns are just like steel ropes which are extended from leaves to the roots. If the rope is pulled from the top, the entire rope will move upward. In plants, the pull is now how this pull is generated. This pull is created by the loss of water from the leaf surface by the process called transpiration. So this pull is called transpiration pull. The water vapors evaporates from the mesophyll cells to the inner cellular spaces as a result of transpiration. The water vapors are transpired through the stomatal pores. Loss of water from the mesophyll cells. The loss of water from the mesophyll cells cause a decrease in water potential. That is, the cell sap of the mesophyll cells become more concentrated and consequently their water potential is decreased. The water moves from cell to cell along the water potential gradient from higher water potential level to the lower water potential level. Finally, the movement of water within the leaf is transmitted to the water filled in the xylem element. This exerts a pull and the water filled in the xylem comes in a state of tension. This pull is called transpiration pull. This, this transpiration pull or tension generated at the top of the water column is transmitted downwards from petiole stem and finally reaches to the roots. So, the tension created by transpiration, that is the transpiration pull, osmotic uptake of water by living cells and the hydration of cell walls get relieved by an upward movement of water. Thus, this theory strongly suggests the cohesion of water and transpiration pull is responsible for the upward movement of sap in the plants. Cohesion and tension theory is the most acceptable theory in explaining the ascent of sap. Now we come towards the various factors affecting ascent of sap. How the ascent of sap will be affected, as it is dependent upon the transpiration pull. So the water transport is regulated by all those forces which affect the rate of water absorption and transpiration. Therefore, high temperature, low atmospheric humidity, high atmospheric pressure and wind velocity that permit rapid transpiration and thus promote upward transport of water. Deficiency of water in the soil cause decrease in ascent of sap indirectly by influencing the absorption of water. Next one is the stomatal opening and closing also regulates the movement of water in plants. For example, wilting of a plant is coupled with the closure of stomata and it results in the decrease of ascent of sap. So we have studied that the transpiration pull and the cohesion of water is responsible for the ascent of sap. Thank you.